Welcome back to Letterboxd Highlights, the first episode of 2020. New year and a slightly new format. From this point on, episodes will be posted bi-monthly, which means I will be covering 2 months worth of films. Ideally, you will receive 10 recommendations per episode, 5 from each month. So let's not waste any more time and take a look at the first film of January and February of 2020. YOJIMBO, directed by Akira Kurosawa, is a film about a samurai who comes to a town that is ruled by 2 separate gangs, and he decides to play them against each other in hopes of freeing the town. The samurai is played by one Toshiro Mifune, who's worked with Kurosawa on several occasions, but he is wonderful in this. He portrays kind of like an anti-hero type, and he does the stuff that he's got swagger, I guess would be one way of putting it. He has real swagger in how he does things. I don't know if you've seen the episode, but last year I recommended Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars. Well, if you didn't already know, that film and Leone got in a lot of legal trouble because it is basically the same story that is told in this. And because Kurosawa made the film first, though technically Kurosawa's film is based off a book novel. I'm not 100% sure, I probably should have double checked. But there are differences. For example, I honestly kind of prefer the cinematography in this one, and I was really surprised at how comedically strong it is at places. And I mentioned Toshiro Mifune's performance, but to be entirely honest, the majority of the cast put in pretty solid performances that help raise his. And yeah, this is a great Japanese samurai film that was later ripped off by Leone. They can exist at the same time, they're both great films, okay? The next film I want to recommend to you is North by Northwest, directed by Mr. Alfred Hitchcock, who has, fastly become one of my favourite directors. I can't believe it's taken me so long to actually watch his films. In case you didn't already know, this is about a New York advertising executive who has to go on a run after being mistaken for a government agent by a bunch of foreign spies. It's typical Hitchcock. He's a master of suspense and tension. It also has iconic set pieces such as the crop duster scene and the chase down Mount Rushmore. What? I'm actually struggling with this a bit because I didn't write a lot in my review on Letterboxd, I just made a joke. But that particular joke has a point to it, in a sense that this age Hitchcock at his best. The end of the 50s is kind of when he made the films that he's most known for, and there's a reason why Hitchcock is one of the most celebrated directors of all time. Earlier this year we saw the release of 1917, directed by Sam Mendes, and I'm recommending it to you if you haven't already seen it, because it's still in cinemas in March, even though it came out like the start of January. That is madness. What can I say about this film? It's a technical marvel. I've always been a big fan of using as few shots as possible, and especially the whole one continuous shot thing. This isn't that, because there are definitely cuts. But the caveat that is that the narrative is so ambitious that to do this entire film in one continuous shot, it's not just difficult, it would be stupid. You would mess things up. Things go wrong when you do stuff like that. And you don't want to do that when you've got fucking pyrotechnics and hundreds of extras and stuff. That's just not a smart decision. It's still impressive. There are a few films I know off the top of my head that have done the one-shot thing. Birdman is probably the most recognizable one besides from 1917. And it does tickle me when I left the cinema that I was hearing people say, oh my god, I've never seen that before. I'm getting off topic somewhat. On that note, Roger Deakins is one of the best cinematographers alive. There's no doubt about it. And his work on this film is exemplary. Like, Deakins is the man. He is the fucking man. And then you pair it with performances that are pretty solid. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have given them any awards for it, and I don't think they got any awards for it, but they're good enough for what it is. And that's not really what the film's about. The film is about this one-shot thing, and it is engaging. Like, it is very engaging, and it is tense at moments. Admittedly, there are a few creative decisions I disagreed with, especially in regards to the use of score for certain scenes. I think there are some scenes that would be a lot more harrowing if they were just you know, just diegetic sound. But that's besides the point. This is a great achievement in film, and if you haven't already seen it, it should still be in cinemas. Go check it out. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favourite directors working these days. So watching Inherent Vice, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's still a great film. But I'll give you the narrative and then explain a few things. It's set in 1970 and it follows drug-fueled private investigator Larry Sportello as he investigates the disappearance of an old girlfriend. But it's not. It's not entirely PTA's fault, because I've read somewhere that the source material is insanely difficult to adapt. But there is so much going on in this film. There are so many narrative layers that kind of go unexplored, and that's not necessarily a negative thing, because sometimes it's good to leave a film with questions. It can just be a bit frustrating for some people, I understand. Having said that, Larry Sportello is played by Joaquin Phoenix, who I don't know how many times I have to sing his fucking praise. He's one of the best actors working, and he's great in this. I mean, kind of what you expect from him. You also have Josh Brolin, who plays Bigfoot, and his chemistry with Larry Sportello, Joaquin Phoenix, is superb. Honestly, I could do with like a kind of buddy cop movie between those two, like a buddy cop movie where they hate each other. Like, this dynamic would be killer for an entire film. And the cinematography is wonderful as well. As I said, it's a difficult recommendation. It is a lot to take in. It's about 2.5 hours long, which isn't ridiculous for a film, but with the amount of stuff that goes on in this film, it can be overwhelming. So bear that in mind, but PTA is one of the best directors alive, and this is another great film. So the last film that I watched in January that I want to recommend to you is Uncut Gems, directed by the Safdie brothers, Benny and Josh, also known for another great film, In Good Time, which was one of my favourite films a few years back. I want to start this out by saying, straight up, I've never been a huge Adam Sandler fan. I think it's because of the films he makes, kind of that lowbrow comedy, and lowbrow comedy has its place. But his stuff is especially irritating at times. On the few occasions that he's done more serious stuff, Paul Thomas Anderson's Punch Drunk Love being one example, he's been great. And in Uncut Gems, he is glorious. Like, he's playing this dude, but it's not Adam Sandler, it is this dude, and it's awesome. The Sandman plays Howard Ratner, who is a New York City jeweler who kind of has a bit of a gambling problem, but he eventually makes a bet that could be a massive windfall for him and the ones he loves. But this whole film is fucking anxiety-inducing, man. Like, with tension pieces, it always tends to, it's like that underlying current of unease, and then there are certain scenes where, like, things peak up. But everything in this film adds to that anxiety, just from the way conversations work. Everyone talks over each other. You can't really understand a lot of the conversations that happen, and you're just kind of in a permanent state of unease. You don't really get a break. I mean, there's maybe a few moments of levity, but you're always kind of uneasy. And then the fucking ending is like a fucking perfect climax. Like, seriously. I don't know, man. Like, Uncut Gems is currently in place as my favourite film of this year, even though it came out last year in the US. UK gets shit later, so it's currently my favourite film of the year. And it's going to be really difficult for any film later this year to beat it, because it's so good. The Safdies are fastly becoming like two of the best directors alive, and I'm so excited to see what happens next. Now we're on to the month of February, and we're starting off with another really special film, and that's Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. Now, I want to be the first to admit that I'm not a big fan of his previous work, The Witch. I just didn't connect with it as well as some people. But The Lighthouse is glorious. I can't remember the last time I watched a film that captured a tone and an aesthetic as well as this does. It's about two lighthouse keepers played by Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe who try to maintain their sanity while stuck on a remote island in the 1890s. And I'll be the first to admit, it doesn't sound that interesting, but the way it is presented, the visual style, the score, even just the way they converse, and it is something truly like magical. I don't use that word often, like, but it is magical. Like, Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe's chemistry is evident, and they both put in absolutely glorious performances. I'm out of words to describe this film because I adore it. Mermaids, though. Who knew, huh? So, Parasite won Best Picture at the Oscars this year, breaking records, first foreign language film to win Best Picture, and rightfully so. I've seen all nominees bar Little Women, and there is no film that deserved it more than Parasite did. It's a Korean film, but it resonates a lot with Western audiences because of its discussion of class and, to a certain extent, capitalism, how the working class will fight each other just to even have a sniff of that, 1% life. So Parasite is the tale of a poor family, the Kims, who con their way into becoming servants for the Parks, who are the rich family, and complications ensue because of it. And honestly, I can't add anything to this discussion that hasn't already been said. There's a ton of reviews that put it a lot better than I could. There's great performances, great cinematography, and a story that will resonate across Western culture as well as Eastern culture. Bronson, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, I think that's how you say his name, is the tale of a young man who is sentenced to 7 years in prison for robbing a post office, but ends up spending nearly 3 decades in solitary. While in there, his personality is replaced by his alter ego of Charlie Bronson. While I think it's probably not his best film, this is not my favorite Refn film, solely because it's the Tom Hardy show. He is the main, he's the main character obviously, but he drives the entirety of the film and his performance is second to none. There's a ton of like weird quirks and eccentricities. He's truly a one-man show. There's some stunning cinematography all throughout the piece and heavy film grading, which is something I'm growing to love more and more the further into my film journey I go. If I had one complaint, it'd be a pacing issue because it's a 90-minute film that doesn't feel quite right. However, it's so enjoyable. Like, I think if you like stuff like maybe Snatch, Lock, Stock, those kind of like British films, you might enjoy this. I'm breaking my policy on 10 films per episode already, but I'm doing so for good reason because I want to recommend to you a trilogy of films, and that is the Before trilogy, which is Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. It's a 3-part romance series that follows Jesse, played by Ethan Hawke, and Celine, played by Julie Delpy, set over 3 decades, that was actually filmed over 3 decades. And we see these two people kind of fall in love, then fall in love again, and then struggle with their relationship. The reason why I want to recommend the whole trilogy is I think while you could watch each film individually, they are designed as a trilogy, and it was kind of hard to recommend one without the others. If I had to pick a favourite, it's Before Sunset, the middle film, because I think it's a superb tension piece, more than just a romance film. But this trilogy works so well because of the chemistry between the two leads. The way the film kind of presents itself, we're not watching to, it's still a film, so it's romanticized to a certain extent, but it feels like two people who are just talking. And if you don't like films that don't have action, then this isn't going to be for you, because all 3 films are basically, they're talkies. That's what they're referred to as. We literally follow these 2 people as They walk through Vienna, Paris, and somewhere in Greece, I can't remember where, and they just talk about life, about their past, their future. Before Sunset was an important part of my film journey because it taught me that it was okay to make a film like this, that you're taught in education that there's a structure to a story, and you've got to have kind of like a conflict. But these films are, you could argue there's still conflict, but they're just talking, that's all it is. And that's okay. This series isn't going to be for everyone, but I think in terms of romantic films, this is probably the best set of films in the genre. The last film I want to recommend to you is entitled Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and it's a romance film set on a remote island in Brittany in the 18th century, where a reluctant painter is hired to paint a wedding portrait of a woman set to be married off. But obviously, I said romance, these two obviously end up falling in love, but it's done so in a very, it's tasteful and it's lovely to see, honestly. It's gorgeously shot, beautifully detailed, from the set design to the costumes, to the locations, their personalities, how they interact with each other. I've never been a big fan of period pieces because I find them so stale, but this isn't. It's superb and I love it. And that concludes this episode of Letterboxd Highlights. If you have or plan on watching any of these films, be sure to let me know in the comments below because I would love to have a discussion about them. So last year I messed with the format of the show quite a bit, and it was probably frustrating for some, but it was a necessary evil to avoid me suffering from burnout, because doing the exact same thing every single month is so boring, especially when you're not overly happy with the format of the show, which I had lost obviously because of the way YouTube's copyright system works. However, I have made slight tweaks, you'll have seen it in this episode, and I'm hoping that I can continue to do so throughout the year to a point where I get happy with the way it's presented. I'll never be content because that's not how I work. It's not how I create. I never get to a point where it's like, oh yeah, I can stop improving on stuff, because what's the point in making stuff? As I mentioned at the start of the episode, I'm posting bi-monthly now, and that is to help me have time to tweak the show and work on it at my own pace, instead of feeling like, oh god, it's the start of the month, I have to pump out an episode, because I was seriously considering not continuing the series this year if I had to do that, because it's not fun, and this is meant to be fun. And I'm hoping that the new format works better, because I wanted to discuss the film more. I didn't want it to be brief snippets. Last year my idea was make it brief to keep people interested, but I would rather sell 1 or 2 films to you than just none of them, simply because I didn't go into enough detail, which is what I'm hoping to change. I'm hoping to give more detail about what the film's about, who's in it, who directed it, who worked on it, and why you should watch it. And I didn't nail it with this one. I know I didn't nail it, but it's something I'm going to work on. I will see you for the next edition of Letterboxd Highlights, which will be in May. And until then, just remember, love film.